Hi everyone, my name is Karina and I work at Brimbank City Council as an environmental educator. I would like to begin this webinar by doing an acknowledgement of country. Brimbank City Council respectfully acknowledges and recognises the Kulin Nation, including the Wurundjeri, Bunurong and Boon Wurrung peoples as the traditional owners of this land and waterways, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. For the traditional owners, the lands in the city of Brimbank have always been a significant trading and meeting place. So this photograph, Ellen, can you change the photograph, please?
To which
the
one?
Slide?
Yep.
The Sydenham Park.
Oh, that is Sydenham Park.
Oh.
That was Sydenham Park.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So this photograph is taken of Sydenham Park in Keilor North. The junction of Deep Creek, Jacksons Creek and Maribyrnong River is considered a special meeting place with inherent Indigenous cultural heritage. This event has been organised as part of a series of webinars for our teacher environmental networking workshops that we are recording and uploading to our school's education webpage on our Brimbank City Council website. Now I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Ellen Rigos. Ellen is the team leader for the School Food Gardens program at Cultivating Community and has worked for almost 30 years as a teacher and educator in sustainability. For the past decade, she has been a casual teacher at Royal Botanic Gardens, Victoria. She holds a graduate diploma in sustainability and social change from Oasis Graduate School. Her love affair of food gardening began as a small child harvesting hot figs off the tin roof of her grandfather's garage and climbing apricot trees in her grandmother's garden. Her approach to teaching sustainability has evolved over time to awakening wonder through the art of facilitating embodied learning experiences outdoors. Nature play is one of her passions, and of course, food waste recycling. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you, Karina. Lovely to speak. Sorry, I did have to get up and just change my camera angle because I'm getting strange light effects on my computer. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's PD for teachers on food gardening design with children. I'd just like to introduce Cultivating Community. So I work at Cultivating Community. We envisage a joyful, connected communities who care for each other and our earth. Our purpose is to inspire a healthy and a just world by providing nourishing and informative food gardening experiences. We work with diverse and low-income communities in Victoria to create a fair, secure and resilient food system by improving access to healthy, affordable and culturally appropriate food. There are three main programs. We're probably best known for our public housing community gardens. We have 21 community gardens across Melbourne. We also do a lot of work with food systems like our community food kitchen in Fitzroy, and I'm the team lead for the school food garden program. So if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about the work we do, I've put our website there. So today's workshop is an introduction. I've done two previous workshops and they were on food gardening in schools and why they're really important to have, as well as food waste recycling. So this is a third workshop in the series, and I'm going to give you an introduction to how to actually design a food garden with students. I'm still getting that dreadful look in the slides. And I'm going to take you a step-by-step process of how you would go about designing a food garden with students and what resources will assist you to actually take students through that process. So questions, you can type questions along the way of this presentation, but at the end we'll have time to answer questions. The presentation,
Ellen,
yes?
Sorry, Ellen. Alicia has a hand up.
Yes?
Do we want to unmute her quickly just to see what she's asking?
Yep, I will find out. Hold on. Oh, there it is, right at the top. Alicia, allowed to talk. Alicia, what's your question?
Well, I accidentally pressed the lower hand button. I just wasn't sure. Yeah, I thought you were practicing the introduction. I wasn't sure if it started or not, but sorry.
That's okay. So if you do have questions to ask, we'll do all the questions at the back. You can type in questions as we go along and they'll be answered at the end of the presentation. I'm getting very strange. I'm just going to shut that curtain because it's really making some strange pictures. Hold on a second. Okay, that's solved the problem. I haven't actually done a webinar during the day, and that's the first time I've had that happen. So now we've got our technology straight and the lighting working. We'll move down to our next slide. So in terms of designing a food garden with students, there are so many benefits. One of them is that the students have a really good ownership of the garden. So they get to learn some design principles and processes, and they have active hands-on inquiry-based learning.
Sorry, Ellen, sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I'm still seeing the first slide on the screen.
Are you?
Can you just double check? Yeah, I've still got the designing a food garden with students, teacher, PD, the first slide.
That's strange. I'll unshare and reshare again. You share? That's really strange. Is that working for you? What can you see now?
I can still see the first slide, designing a food garden slide.
Okay, that's really strange. I've never had that happen before. Is
everyone
else?
Go. Yeah, it's just changed now. It's changed.
It's changed? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Good. So you can see it? Fantastic.
It went back to the first slide though. It did change for a minute and now I've gone back to the designing a food garden with students.
Is everyone else able to see the other slides? Let me see if I can close everything down. It shouldn't.
Now it's changed. Yep. Oh. It keeps. I'm sorry, Ellen. Maybe we should just keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm not sure if everyone else, maybe someone else in the question and answer box can let us know if what slides they're seeing. Okay. So ownership of the garden, it allows people to have an experiential and multi-sensory learning experience, and it fosters the use of system thinking and interdisciplinary learning. It blurs the boundaries between academic learning and creative play, and it increases the students' health and well-being. So there's some of the advantages of designing a student garden. So I'm going to actually put up a poll. We'll see how the poll goes. And I'd like to find out a little bit about who's here today. And I'm going to launch a poll where you get to tell me what your role is, whether you're a teacher in early childhood, primary or secondary, and also whether you're a principal, a parent, or maybe you're someone else. So I can get a sense of who's here at this webinar today. And also what you currently have at your school or centre. Do you have a food garden? You can tick multiple ones for the second one. If you have a range of different things at your school, it just gives me an idea of who's in the audience. And when we end the poll, we'll just get a sense. So at the moment, the majority are, we've got quite a lot of secondary teachers in the audience as well as primary teachers. We've got one principal, a couple of parents and some others in the audience today as well. Great. So I might just end the poll so you can see. There we go. So we have mainly primary and secondary teachers represented and quite a number of others. You might want to put yourself in the question and answer just to let us know what other sort of roles you have and why you're interested in attending today's session. And also lots of you have food gardens already. So 70% have food gardens, which is 21 out of 30. So that's great. This is a focus for setting up a food garden, but even if you have an existing food garden, it will be really, can you see the results?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. You should be able to have a look at the results and see that most of you there have food gardens set up in place. A couple have, 3 schools have native edible gardens, 4 have an outdoor classroom, a couple have permaculture gardens. 8 schools have cooking programs, some have none of the above. So that's great. That's a really good indication of who's in the group today. So thank you for sharing those. I'll stop sharing that now and we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you.
Sorry, Ellen, I'll just quickly mention that I had a quick look at question and answers, and I am getting quite a few people saying the same thing. Quite a few attendees are mentioning that they can only see that first slide as well, like me.
Oh, can they? Okay, so what I might do is I'll pause the share, and if I resume the share, let's see if that works. Does that work?
Not yet.
Nope. Okay, so I'm going to have to do a new share, I think. Let's go back to this one and see what happens. What can you see now?
Yeah, A to Z growing food.
Perfect. I think we might have solved the problem. It might have been sharing an also. Well, hopefully this will help everyone. So this is the A to Z of growing food. Like, there's lots of reasons why you could grow food at a school. And I'm not going to go through each of these now because I did this in my previous presentation, but just to show that there's so many benefits for students of growing food in a school and having a school garden, from the appreciation of natural cycles right through to zero waste in action. And I thought I'd put this up because it's a really good case study if you want to actually get buy-in from your principal and your school principal or school staff, that you've got some really good outline as to why a school should take on a food garden program. This is one of the most recent reports that's come out to look at the impact of learning of food gardens, and there's some fantastic research happening around the world just to show that learning is actually improved if you have a food garden at your school. So there's some great research being done to show the benefits on all learning across the board of having a school garden. So today's focus is on designing the school garden, and the best place to start is to have a bit of a vision, and it doesn't have to be complicated, but really making sure that you have a sense of purpose. Why is it that you want to set up a food garden, and what do you want to achieve? What are some of the principles on how you are going to do it, and what will guide you in what you do? And the practice, what are you actually going to do and how will you do it? And they're probably the 3 areas you want to be considering as a school if you're wanting to set up a food garden at your school. Now, it does start with a shared vision. I love to get students involved in having a say of their vision for the school garden. It actually, at the top, I've put a sample school vision, which is our school food garden will improve the health and well-being of our community by providing the knowledge and skills that enable a environmentally sustainable future. So that's just a really simple shared vision. But when you get the answers from the students, you'll get a much broader picture of some of the benefits as to why they're wanting to have a food garden at their school. And you'll probably find they come into 3 categories: health and well-being aspects, learning aspects, and sustainability. And getting a sense of what will make this food garden a success and who can we involve in the process. I have put a link to a fantastic resource that's been put together by Junior Landcare on creating a food garden vision, if you'd like to go a bit further into that. And just a simple activity that you can start off with children is to get them to tell you what their vision is. And they could do this in a collage, a model, it could be a drawing, a painting, and then to report back to the class on what their vision for a school garden is. And the beauty of things these days is there's so many ways this vision can be created. I've seen students use Minecraft, Legos, little replications of tray gardens. You can do drawings and paintings. So the vision can be quite broad, and you'll always get some fantastic ideas in these visions. And so when you get those visions together, part of it is collating all those ideas and then making some decisions around how you decide on what you want to incorporate in your school food garden. And getting the students to actually tell you a little bit about the garden that they already have and what they're currently using, and what they would like to do in the future if they were to have a food garden, what they would like to grow, what they would like to eat, but more importantly, how they would like to feel and what sort of senses you want to engage them with in a food garden. And it's really important for setting the scene to get the students involved in making some of those decisions early on, and the discussions that come out from these decisions as well. Once you've got all that process starting. You actually want to get outside and walk. You want the kids to start connecting to the space that is going to be the food garden. So they're going to be observing, they're going to be testing, they're going to be digging and recording and measuring. Anything that gets them outside and connecting to the space. So they've got that ownership from the very beginning, and they get to see the change over time. Now, site analysis is a very fancy word. And really, when you're designing a garden, these things are things that will need to be thought about. They don't need to be that complicated, but you are going to need to think about the climate, the microclimate, and the rainfall. So really thinking about the best spot in your school to put a food garden. Just being aware of what existing trees and plants are already in that space. It's really important to do some testing of your soil. Not only just the pH and texture, but also of some of the chemicals that might be available. I might just mute you, Karina. Am I getting some funny background noise? Or it might be some participants. Let me just check that I'm not getting any participant muting. Hold on. No? There is some funny sounds. Can you hear the funny sounds, or is it just me?
No, I can't hear anything.
Okay, I'm getting some strange sounds in the background. Okay. The sun over time, it's really important to have a look at how the sun falls on the space as well, and mapping out the shadows and making sure that you have great access to water and drainage as well. That's really, really important. So they're the 4 areas. They're really great 4 areas to investigate with students, and how in depth you want to go with the students really does depend on how much time you want to spend on the design phase. Site analysis gives kids a great opportunity of understanding bird's eye view, drawing maps, making plans and designing. So it's a really great process for thinking about design. Soil's very scientific. You're looking at the science and the structure. So it's a really great area of learning around what is soil, what's it made up of, what makes our soils healthy. Then water and drainage is a really good one for understanding rainfall and how water impacts on plants and soil. And climate and microclimate's a bit more complicated, but as a designer in placing your garden, you need to be aware of the microclimate of the sites that you're selecting, and that really helps in doing a really good design. So they're the 4 areas you're looking at when you're working with the students around designing a garden. There are some important links that you need to be aware of. I always recommend dull before you dig, just to make sure you're not going to hit any electricity cables or any underground plumbing. It does happen. I've been involved in doing school gardens where we've accidentally broken water pipes and had to get plumbers in. Sometimes school grounds can be quite old, and the maps and the diagrams don't actually have every pipe that's there. So you do need to be careful when you're digging. Also, soil testing. Macquarie University does a fantastic program called Veggie Safe. And you can send off 4 samples of your soil for $20 and get them tested to make sure it is safe to grow plants in the soil. You can do more expensive and complicated tests, but it's a great one because students can be involved in that whole process of collecting the samples, sending it off, getting the data back and understanding what the soil's made of. So there's some really great links. You will get access to a PDF of these presentations. So these links will all be available to you at the end of the presentation. Now, getting into the garden design, this is the fun stuff. This is the stuff that the kids really love. I'm going to just do a little introduction to aesthetics because I think it's something we overlook when we're thinking about food garden design. Looking at how you choose the elements that you would like to have in your food garden. Thinking a little bit about design, movement and flow, structures and plant selection. So aesthetics is all about what you would like to look and feel like, what that garden's going to be like at the end. And I'm just going to show you 5 different food gardens around Melbourne. They're not school gardens. I wanted to keep it away from school gardens, but just to give you an idea that food gardens can have a very different look and feel. The first one, these are some food garden beds at Rip and Lee. They're the garden beds that Attica use for their restaurant. They're raised pellets, so you can see that they're above ground. And they grow a lot of herbs and native edibles in these gardens. This one is Digger's Garden in Heronswood, and you can see it's a circular garden. It looks like a bit like a wheel, a pie, or even a pizza garden, really. So it's got a very beautiful aesthetic. You've got one of Cultivating Communities community gardens in Fitzroy with over 100 users in that particular space. This one's at Heidi Garden, and this is their herb and flower garden, but they also have a food garden with a very similar aesthetic. And this is the Royal Children's Garden in Melbourne, and this is the food garden they have there. So just a quick poll, just to find out what your aesthetic likes are. Let's have a look. We'll do our second poll, and poll 2. Just to give me an indication of what aesthetic you like, because I think it's really good for us to be really clear that gardens do have aesthetics, and we all have different preferences around what looks lovely and what doesn't. So as you can see, you'll be able to see soon, the variation is quite huge. So that's great. Nearly finished, a few more people. And then we're all done. Fantastic. I think I'll end the poll now and we'll launch it so you can have a look. As you can see, there's a range of different approaches and different likes around gardens in terms of what people find appealing and what people don't. So it's a really good demonstration that aesthetics have different impacts on how we feel in a space. And it's good to be aware of that. I'll talk a little bit later about some of the gardens that we've designed for schools. So I'll stop sharing that now. Okay. Okay, so with a food garden, you're going to have a bit of a wish list. So I've put together a wish list of some of the things you might like to consider when you're putting together a food garden. You might like some annual vegetable garden beds. You might consider chickens or other poultry that you'd like to have at your school. A community herb and tea garden, compost bays, bins, worm farms, fire pit and gathering circle, flower and sensory garden, a food forest and orchard, a frog bog and indigenous garden, garden shed and greenhouse, a gathering circle, native edible garden, outdoor kitchen with shelter, permaculture garden, propagation table, wicking beds and water tanks, and water saving features. So there's quite a few different things that you consider, and there's a lot more, but there's some of the basic ones that you might consider in putting together a food garden, and prioritizing which are the most important to get up and running first, and maybe some of the longer term vision of things that you might like later down the track. I've put this also in for early childhood educators. There's no one in the audience today from an early childhood background, so I'll just leave that there. But there are slightly different process you probably want to go through if you were designing a food garden for an early childhood centre. So that's a little checkbox of things you might like to consider in that context. In terms of garden design, movement and flow, once you've allocated your space, it's really thinking about how all these different elements are going to sit together in space and how you're going to move, how the students are going to move and utilise those different aspects. This is a lovely little clip. I'm not going to put the clip on today because of time, and it just takes a long time to get through. But you might like to see a case study of the work that was done at St John's Primary School in Footscray. And this was with the kids in terms of their process. They spent 6 months designing their food garden. And this is one of the drawings. It's a lovely little video that shows the whole process they went through. But you can see that kids come up with the most amazing designs, from, giant water slides to fire-breathing dragon pits. And so the creativity that comes out through this process is absolutely beautiful. And you really want to capture the essence of what the kids come up with when you come to your final design. This ended up being the final design for the school, but the beauty of designs is that they change. So aspects that have been done and things have changed over time just as you start to evolve the project. So the chickens are where they are, the compost bins have been moved, some of the veggie garden beds are now a fire pit. So over time, you have an initial idea and vision for the garden, but as you start to use and work in the space, it starts to have its own life. But it is a really important process to go through just to have a really clear vision and clear ideas of what you'd like the garden to be achieving. This is one that Joanna, one of our garden educators, she's working at a school called Aberfeldy in Essendon at the moment. And this is one of her students' designs there. And they've done a fantastic little design of what they want their garden to look like. And they're just put in the veggie beds at the moment. And you can see that's the finished design that's been put together based on all the student input in terms of what they'd like to see and how they'd like to feel. So some of the considerations you need to think about when you're designing your food gardens is to think about all the options before you start eliminating. So collating all those fantastic ideas that the students come up with and figure out a process on how you're going to assess which ones stay and which ones you might have to put on hold or which ones you might have to eliminate altogether. So it is a collaborative process. Being strategic with your design so that you're making sure that you're getting what you want from your food garden. Not compromising on what you'd like to achieve. Thinking in zones really helps in a school so that you've got themes. In the last picture, if we go back, there's actually, you probably can't see it, but there's actually a lizard zone where the lizards are going to live. So thinking in lovely creative language can be really helpful too, and getting the students to name their garden. At St. John's, there was a moustache garden. A kid came up with the idea of having a moustache in the garden. So they created a moustache garden bed. So really drawing on the designs and the ideas of the children just gives a beautiful character to your design. It's really important that you actually maximise the use of sun for annual gardens. So not planting trees along your north face, you're wanting them along your south face of your garden. So just some really practical things about where you place different elements and what shade impacts it's going to have on your garden. And really being prepared to adapt and improvise over time. One of the most important things, especially in regards to growing trees, is thinking of the garden 20 years from now, because this is a big investment for a school. And when you plant a tree, some trees will live for over 100 years. So you are thinking well into the future. So really thinking clearly about especially the trees that you put in the garden, how they're going to be nurtured from now right into the future. In terms of garden beds, because they're a common one in schools, it is good to have them slightly raised just to stop them being trampled on. You don't have to, but I find that just the reality of children running around gardens, having a little bit of a barrier means that they're less likely to get trodden on. Garden beds tend to run north-south. That actually maximises the amount of growing sun, and having a variety of widths. It's really good to have some wider beds for growing potatoes and sweeter potatoes, and then having some smaller beds for growing quick lettuces, for example. You can have it knee deep or waist height. You can have different height garden beds as well, especially for mobility issues. Now there's definitely someone with their speaker on, so I'm just going to have to go and try muting all. Let's go. Mute all. No, it's not working. Okay. Also, using good compost in your beds is really important. I recommend putting a worm tower in each of your garden beds just to get really great bacteria happening in the soil, and then each of the classes can look after one of those worm towers. And wheelchair access, if you want wheelchair access, which I think is a great idea in school food gardens, you're wanting paths around 1.2 metres wide so that wheelchairs can have access at all times. So there's some of the real practicalities around some of your garden bed designs. Wicking beds are an option in that they reduce water use. I find they're fantastic for early childhood centres. You just have to be careful not to damage them. That's one of the challenges of having wicking beds, is that they're really good for quick growing crops that don't have a lot of root depth, and you don't want to be putting stakes into them because you'll actually damage your wicking beds. But they are a really great option for schools. In terms of materials, when you're thinking about a food garden, materials are really, really important. So from a sustainability perspective, you're wanting to think about biodegradable or recyclable materials that end of life, they can be reused. Environmentally and ethically produced and sourced materials are really important. Things that have recycled content or have been upcycled things that come from a renewable resource rather than a non-renewable resource, and things that are being sourced locally. So that's a really good criteria when you're designing your garden, is to think about where you're going to get all the materials and how you're going to make decisions about what's purchased. Seating circles, I think, are one of the most important parts of a food garden. You really need somewhere where a class can come out and sit together. There's different options. The cheapest option are straw bales, and they're fantastic because they last a year and then they go back into the garden and get recycled. You can have some more stable ones made out of wood, and I really love this tyre one I saw at a school in Springvale, where they used some old tyres to create a seating circle with a fire pit in the middle. So there's lots of options for seating circles, but really that's where your garden classes will start and end, is in these circles. In terms of sustainability, I'm just going to run through a little bit. There's some options of setting up compost and worm farms, making sure you incorporate native edibles. I really recommend secondary schools think about a permaculture approach, because it's a great approach for secondary schools. Thinking about the materials used and the wildlife habitat. And I've got a few slides with some pretty pictures on that later. In terms of plant propagation, it's great to have a greenhouse and a shade house if possible, if your budget allows it. And having tables outdoors where the students can propagate and do activities and collect seeds and pot up plants. They could be a great project where you actually engage local woodworkers or family members who are very building minded to come in and work with the kids to construct them themselves. So great opportunities to have kids involved in building and making things out of wood. And then they're great opportunities for them to be part of your garden design. In terms of water, that's one of the most important features of a food garden, is that you will need to collect and store water. So water tanks are really important and luckily most schools have great opportunities to harvest water off their roofs. And a lot of schools these days have water tanks in place. Also, improving your soil will improve the amount of water that is retained. So making sure that as part of your food garden design, you're constantly improving your soil and you're mulching constantly, that everything is always mulched. So you're getting good layers of mulch breaking down to improve the soil and improve the amount of water that's retained. Plants are a really good indicator of when they need to be watered. So being really good at observing plants and planting strategically. So things that need more water are grouped together, and things that don't need as much water can be grouped together as well. Watering deeply and less frequently is better than watering shallowly more often. So you really want deep watering when you do water. One good water a week is better than a few shallow waters during the week. If you have the opportunity to set up some irrigation, that can be really helpful too. You just have to be careful with irrigation. It can be quite a costly and timely exercise to do if it isn't done well, or if it gets damaged with digging, which can happen quite often in a school garden. In terms of the tools and equipment, they're really, really important to purchase quality tools. So really good tools are worth the investment, and not that many. Start off with minimalist tools. You don't need one trowel per student. You probably need to buy things in sets of 6 or 7 so that you have small groups working on things at once, and storing them and looking after them well. So getting the students really comfortable with how to handle tools safely and how to care for them and how to actually sharpen and maintain them as well, so that they're kept clean and they last a long time. Garden sheds, some schools allow their students to go in and collect the tools and some schools don't, and that's something that a school will have to make a decision about, how comfortable they are with students having access to the tool shed. We're going to move on to plant selection. It is a topic in itself. I could spend all day talking about plants and I've only got 5 minutes. So I'm just going to give you the quick, simple guides of how to make selections around plants. Basically, annual plants are the easy things. They're the things that you plant and then within 12 months they've gone to seed and they die off. So they're the easiest things to move and the easiest things to plant. Gardenate has a fantastic calendar that will send you an email every month letting you know what to plant each month, what's ready to go in, what you sow as a seed, what you plant as a seedling. So I'd recommend that you subscribe to Gardenate and get that monthly email, because that will give you all the information that you'll ever need around annual plants. Perennial plants, I would actually suggest getting some professional advice. If you're going to plant fruit trees, I'd really suggest that you get some professional advice about location and where to plant them, just because they are a long-term investment. And the biggest mistake I see at schools is trees inappropriately planted in food gardens. So something that if you've got a parent at your school who's a landscaper, or you know someone who's an avid food gardener, or if you have a local permaculture group that you can contact, getting some professional advice on where to plant plants, especially fruit trees. For example, a mulberry tree can grow up to 15 meters high and 10 meters wide. You really want to be thinking carefully around where your big trees are going when you put them in the ground. So where do you start? I always say start small and simple with school gardens. Getting comfortable planting easy annuals, growing some seedlings, sprouting some sprouts, some of the staple foods, and some perennial herbs. In a food garden, they're the easiest things to get established and to get going. And as you get more confident with your food garden and the kids grow more skills, you'll be able to move up to challenging annuals, some microgreens, put in some mushrooms maybe, seed growing, trees of course, and then all the weird and wonderful plants that you can be growing in a food garden. So starting small and simple and getting really good at keeping those plants alive and being able to harvest and preserve and cook them, and then working your way up to some more challenging plants to be growing in the garden. In terms of my favourite plants for schools, I've chosen some that are a bit unusual and some that you'll be very familiar with as well. In terms of annuals, carrots are fantastic plants that you can eat all parts of. So the carrot tops you can make into pesto, you can stir fry them, you can eat the carrots, you can collect the seeds. There's so much you can do with a carrot. Herbs can be both annual and perennial, but herbs are probably the easiest thing to grow and great for making herb butters and putting in soups and making herb teas. Jerusalem artichokes are something that once you've got, you'll probably never get rid of them at your school. So make sure you put them somewhere where you don't mind them taking over a little bit. But kids love to dig. So any plant that you can plant that kids get to dig up, they will thoroughly enjoy. Kale's great for making chips. Nasturtium, you can eat all parts of the plant, the flowers, the seeds and the leaves. The kids I was working with at one school were making nasturtium tacos. They would grate lots of vegetables, make a dressing and put them in nasturtium leaves and eat them like tacos. And they absolutely loved it. So really simple things that you can be doing. Potatoes are fantastic, great for numeracy as well. Planting 100 potatoes and see how many potatoes you have at the end of the year. Pulses and beans, kids love to eat anything in a pod. So anything in a pod's a great winner. Radishes are quick and easy, and ruby chard will produce over a long period of time. And sweet potato, you can eat the leaves up until the time that the tubers are ready. So they're really simple plants that you can be growing. In terms of perennial trees, I've chosen some unusual ones because they're very productive. So kumquats are fantastic for kids to be able to harvest and make kumquat jam. Curry trees are just prolific. You just need to be careful of the seeds, which are toxic with curry trees. That's probably the only one I've put in there, which I was debating whether to put in or not, but the smell of a curry tree is sensational. So it's worth it for the sensory side of having a curry tree in your garden. Some trees, make sure you consider dwarfs, because bay trees are huge, like literally they can grow to 20 meters high. You want to think about the size that these trees are going to get to at their maximum and really consider whether you really need a 20-meter bay tree in your school garden. So some trees you will want to consider dwarf varieties. Feijoas are great because the fruit falls to the ground, so it's easy for kids to harvest the fruit. Midgeon berries, one of my favourite berries. Olives, you'll get a prolific amount. They're drought tolerant. And you can put them anywhere in the school and you can hedge them. So you've got lots of potential with olives. Passion fruit vines, Karina was telling me they're one of her favourite. So you have to have one just for Karina. Raspberries, I love raspberries. They are slightly prickly, but they're just worth it because they're so productive and they won't get inside ever. They'll just be eaten the whole time. Having some native edibles like strawberry gum, you can make beautiful tea out of that. And a tamarillo is a very easy, quick growing fruit that you'll have fruit within 1 or 2 years. So some of these are quite quick growing and also they'll produce fruit quite quickly. In terms of native edibles, it's really important that we're planting native edibles and talking about Indigenous history and culture. So I've put a few of my favourite ones there, from midgeon berries to warrigal greens to Murnong daisies, etc. So lots of fantastic plants that you can plant. I do have a list which I'll send to Karina that is the top 10 native edibles to start off with in your school if you haven't planted any before. They're very easy ones to grow. So really making sure that not only increases biodiversity, but it connects us to our heritage and our history. These are my favourite books. I probably have a couple of 100 food growing books, so it's not really quite fair. But if you really get very excited about food gardening the way I do, these are the ones that I use like reference books all the time. The beauty of Google these days is you can Google anything. And what you're really looking for is you're wanting to know what conditions the plant thrives in, what water requirements it has, if any parts are toxic or not that you need to be aware of. Its biggest, it's going to grow over time, and then what you can use it for. So that's really what you're looking for when you're putting plants into your gardens, how you can then use it and tie it into the school culture that you have. There's lots of fantastic suppliers. These are the ones I use, so I've just put 4 down. I'm sure you've got lots of ones local to your area. These ones tend to specialise in unusual food plants and unusual seeds. So I'd recommend them if you're interested in getting some unusual food varieties and some heirloom varieties that you might like to consider. I'm not going to talk about permaculture because that's very complicated in a short period of time, but I think it's a fantastic option for especially secondary schools. I've got a little, at the top right-hand corner, you'll notice that there's a little sign there, and there is a book on permaculture for school gardens that I only became aware of today, so I actually haven't read it. So I just stuck it there if anyone wanted to do some research on permaculture for school gardens. Templestowe College has a fantastic example of a permaculture garden in action in a secondary school, if people are interested. And I've put a link to a permaculture principle guide for you if you're interested in getting a little bit more deeper into a permaculture philosophy. While you're setting up a food system, it's basically going to attract lots of wildlife. So your food garden is going to bring in bees and butterflies and mini beasts and insects and birds. So actually capitalizing on that is really important. So making sure that you do include some bee and butterfly attracting plants, putting in some bird baths. If there's some mature trees around, that will help as well. Putting logs and rocks, indigenous grasses around the edges, some nesting boxes, some ponds and frog bogs. I've just put this link into My Smart Garden because it is a local resource that you might like to tap into. So it's just something to be aware of, that councils in your area have some great resources online that you might like to consider.
Yeah, and we're part of My Smart Garden program as well.
Fantastic. And Brimbank is part of it. So we're going to just move on to the health and well-being side. So not only is there the emotional and mental and physical well-being of being outside, but there's also the well-being of the eating of the food, which I'm going to move into now. There's so many aspects of this that really impact on students. And I find today that a lot of our schools are talking less and less about the food and more about the emotional and mental well-being of being in a food garden. So it's becoming very much a place where kids can thrive outdoors. So pretty much once you've grown all the food, you've got the opportunity to cook, preserve and recycle as well. This is just to show you a very simple food garden setup. It's outdoors. It's what I use when I teach. You don't need to have an operational kitchen to run a food garden program. This is the cooking component where 6 students harvest the food, wash the food and create something for everyone else to share at the end of a session. So it can be really, really simple. All you can see is we've got a few blunt knives, a few chopping boards. Sometimes I have a grater. There's a few pots to make some herbal tea and a compost bucket. So that's as simple as you can get. And then you can go much more complicated. And also having an outdoor fire is a great way to be cooking outdoors too. There are lots of school cooking programs around, but probably the most well-known is the Kitchen Garden Foundation, the Stephanie Alexander program. So I put the link to the resources there. You can get access to their resources through membership, and they also run teacher PDs around cooking in the outdoor classroom. And I've also put a list to the Healthy Eating Advisory Service because they have a lot of information about healthy eating guidelines in schools, about how to tie it into your canteen and whole school approaches. So I thought they'd be some really good links to just be aware of and to make use of. Now, having a plant-rich diet, the research undeniably shows that students actually learn better when they're well nourished and they're eating healthy meals, and it's been linked to higher grades, better memory and alertness, and faster information processing. I was quite shocked when I was working with a school in Cranberry a couple of years ago, developing a sensory garden with them, and of their 800 students, 300 students were coming to school without breakfast, and about half of those had no breakfast or lunch. So kids are really disadvantaged when they're not eating and they're not able to learn properly. And having a food garden program and integrating that into the curriculum can really support students to thrive in their school. There's a lot of environmental benefits in terms of having a food garden. It connects students to where their food comes from. It'll improve topsoil, lower pollution, reduce carbon emissions, save water and land, and it slows deforestation in terms of a bigger picture. So having a plant-rich diet really inspires kids to be eating well. One of the reasons I introduced that outdoor little kitchen was because I was helping the kids at lunchtime and I would see what they were eating, and I would call it white lunches. They were eating bread and white rice and potato chips, and there was no colour in their lunch boxes. So having a plant-rich diet means that students are getting exposed to different flavours, different textures. They're trying things they probably would not normally have at home. They're usually a bit more adventurous when they've grown it themselves to try weird and wonderful things. It's a bit of a dare sometimes. So you find that students' love of food actually changes when you have a full food garden at the school. In terms of food waste recycling, I did a previous webinar on this, so that's all available if you're interested in that. But it's part of having a food garden, is then taking all that food waste and turning it back into soil and food for the plant. So it's an integral part of having a food waste garden, is the food waste recycling part of it. In terms of food sharing, lots that schools can be doing in terms of community gardens, farmers markets, food swaps and school markets. I was involved in setting up a food garden at East Bentley, and the farmers market that runs bi-monthly now provides the school with the income to run the school cooking garden program. So I think it raises about $80,000 a year for the school to actually keep that as an ongoing program at the school. So there's some really innovative ways you can share food and make this a long-term venture at your school. I have put some teaching resources, a link down there to the Melbourne Food Bowl. So they're for secondary students, but it's good to be aware that Melbourne University is doing some fantastic research into the importance of food growing. And I think schools are part of that important place in that food growing culture. Food security. At times like this, food security has been highlighted as a big issue. And I think schools have a role to play in taking a more active part in how food plays out in our communities by developing good food policies, having breakfast clubs, increasing the amount of food growing on school grounds, and becoming a bit of a hub for food growing. So there's lots of opportunities for schools to take a more active part in food security. And I think the beauty of food growing is that it's going to create lots of connections at your school. All the schools we work with have built up amazing community connections through food growing, in terms of local volunteers, working more collaboratively with council, local community groups. It's just a great opportunity to be involved in more community outreach. There are some great online resources. I've just given you a link to some of the ABC education programs around designing a food garden and life lessons in a classroom. And some of my favourite links. Dirty Teaching would have to be my favourite book around learning outdoors. And then some links to outdoor classrooms, online healthy eating resources, kitchen gardens, and early childhood learning outdoor networks. So lots of resources if you're interested in doing a little bit more research. If you need any support setting up a food garden at your school, Cultivating Community is very happy to assist, especially in that design phase and getting kids involved in design. These are my contact details. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions after today's webinar. We are going to move on to questions now. And I'm going to ask Karina to have a look and tell us what sort of questions we've got that we can start answering.
Well, thank you, Ellen. I thoroughly enjoyed the webinar. It was both fun and informative. I hope it has inspired you all to design food gardens with your own students back at school, either virtually or face-to-face. So as you mentioned, Ellen, this might be a good point to pause and let's have a look at some of the questions. So I'll just have a quick scan through. So quite a few attendees are asking, is it possible to share the presentation via email, Ellen?
So you'll get a link to this live presentation. So you'll get to rewatch it if you're interested, and you'll get a PDF of today's presentation. So yes.
Excellent. Just going down, there's quite a few talking about what timber is best for raised garden beds, from Janine.
Macrocarpa, it's a cypress, it's a pine. It's a pine tree that is usually found in Cypress macrocarpa is what it's called, I think, and it's usually found in farming lands. They used to have the big, you see the line of those really big trees. They're fantastic because it's a hardwood that will last. It's actually softwood, sorry, but it lasts a long time. So you want to treat a timber that's not treated, potentially hardwood, ethically sourced. CERES have some fantastic timber that you can get through them as well, but you're looking for something that's going to last a long time. And I do have a handout on that if anyone is interested around what some of the good timbers are for food gardens, but nothing that's been treated. And you want timbers that are going to last. So you want a garden bed that's going to give you 10 to 15 years at least before it starts to degrade.
Jane has asked, Ellen, do you have any suggestions on how to design a sensory garden?
Oh, lots of them. Any garden is a sensory garden. So any food garden is a sensory garden. It would depend. Look, I did a sensory garden at Cranbourne West Primary School, and we focused on using native plants for that one. So having a bit of a theme around what you're trying to achieve. So that was a native sensory garden. So any plant has a sensory aspect. It's really how you want kids to move through space and interact with it. So it's coming up with some creative designs, coming up with plants that have a really tactile quality to them. They might be furry, they might be smelly, finding out what kids know about plants already, what plants they already warm to and really like, and then extending their exposure to different types of plants. And making sure the garden design, when you're designing it, is very easy to maintain over the long term. So choosing really hardy plants, mainly perennials, I would suggest for a sensory garden, but any garden will be sensory. You're really wanting lots of colour, shape, smell. You're wanting to tap into all those different senses. Yeah, it's a long process. So if you've got any questions, I can answer. I've got some great resources on sensory design if anyone's interested too.
Fantastic. Are there any grants available for food gardens? Sasha is asking.
Councils, there's little grants here and there. The Victorian School Garden Awards has funding and awards each year that you can apply for. There's usually random grants that come out. Last year there was a really big one up to 20,000. So you have to keep your eyes open. We were working with Spotswood Primary School a couple of years ago, and they got $150,000 through the Pick My Project grant. And they did an amazing food garden design, and Carol facilitated that at the school. So you really have to keep your eyes open and be opportunistic and get the community support behind the grant so that you're getting some really good feedback. So you have to be lucky sometimes. Some schools have been luckier than others, I think, to get the support to get food gardens up and running. So keep your eyes open. They do change all the time, the grants.
Melissa's asked, will we have access to the recorded session? So
yes, they will. Yeah.
Karen has asked, can I please have a handout on the timber information that you're talking about?
Yep, I'll provide these all to Karina, so she'll get access to all these resources and we'll be able to distribute them through her network. But I'll also, if you emailed me directly, I can send them to you as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Maria has asked, how concerned should we be to include bee attracting flowers to help pollinate vegetables in a primary school setting?
I think it's really important to have bees, and bees can be native bees. They're not necessarily the European bees. So I think we can't eat without bees and pollination. So we really need to be aware that it's important to have bees in our gardens, and it's learning to be savvy around how to be around bees as well. So learning respect as well as care and interest in a bee's life. So I think it's really important for us to have bees in our schools. In fact, the more bees, the better, I would say. And especially the more native bees. I have blue-banded bees in my garden, and they're just the most spectacular bee you could imagine. So encouraging bee habitat, but learning about bees so that kids feel comfortable and safe to have them in their environment and know why they're so important for us to be having.
Christine has mentioned that she finds that raspberries can take over.
They can. Lots of plants can take over if you let them. I tend to put raspberries along fences, things that, you know, you don't mind if they take over. And the beauty of them is that you dig them up, you propagate them, you sell them, you make an income out of them. There's lots of ways in which, you know, you can use that to your advantage. They are a beautiful plant, and the fruit's worth it. I don't think anything's as nice as a fresh raspberry picked off the plant. So I think it's worth it, really. It's not like Jerusalem artichokes. You dig them up and they'll come back every year. Raspberries are a bit the same, but they are worth it because they taste so good.
Richard has asked, what is a permaculture garden?
Permaculture is a philosophy of gardening that has a systems approach. It's a holistic look at gardening, and it's looking at how everything interrelates. So it's imagining that your food garden is an ecosystem. So you're thinking about the soil, you're thinking about the atmosphere. It's a framework that was developed by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in the late 70s, and it's been going for a long time. It's now a worldwide movement, but it's really good for getting systems thinking happening, and really great for secondary kids to introduce them to holistic thinking around our agricultural systems. It's slightly looks a bit more organic. Just imagine a bit of a food forest. You're imagining it's probably not in straight lines and rows as much as you would see, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's really a framework for thinking about how we grow food and how we can understand the greater systems of food growing. And it's thinking strategically around food growing too. It is complex, which is why I've got that link to that really simple introduction, but I think it's a great one for secondary students to be using. So I've just put it in there as a stimulation if you want to go away and have a think about it.
Fantastic. Karen's asked, do you come out to schools to help with planning new edible gardens?
Yes, so we do. We do it in different ways. We place garden educators in schools. So Joanna's working at Aberfeldy Primary School this year, and she's working with the kids to design and set up their food garden over 3 terms. So it took 2 terms of design and then a term to set it up. And so next year they'll have their food garden operational. So we can do it as short-term projects. We can just give a one-off advice. Usually I like to have the principal involved, because I find if the principal's involved, then you're more likely to see the project getting off the ground and get a lot more ownership of the project across the school. So I don't usually come out to a school unless the principal's in a meeting and they're going to be really supportive of getting a food garden set up. I also do teacher PDs. So one school I'm going to be mentoring them through the process, where they actually do all the work, but I help them each term. So there's different ways in which we can support schools depending on your economic circumstance and how much time and investment you want to put into the program. Yeah.
Janine has asked, how can you convince staff to like gardening? That's a tricky one.
I think what I've found over time is once they see the benefits, and what I find with teachers, and this is the beautiful thing, is that they see students outdoors, and these students that they have trouble with in the classrooms are like different children in the garden. So they start to see the benefits, they start to see the value, they start to relax a little bit about them getting dirty, their kids' hands getting dirty, and they start to eat the food. And it once you engage the senses of the teachers and they feel more comfortable, I think really it's because we're not as comfortable being outdoors as we used to be. When you think originally all classrooms were outdoors, and now pretty much all classrooms are indoors. So we're less comfortable outside. So it's really shifting culture over time and being where your teachers are at, doing it progressively and slowly, but involving teachers along the way. But it will be the benefits that shine through. And that's what we see for all schools, is that I find it takes 6 to 8 years for a whole school to be totally on board. It takes a while to build that culture and for the teachers to see the benefits of having a school food garden program. And then it's embedded, and then the schools don't want to get rid of it. They love it.
Fantastic. Angelica has asked, which plants are easiest to propagate for a school garden?
Lots of plants are easy to propagate. Seeds are probably the easiest. If you're talking about propagation of plants from other plants, then herbs are probably, some of the perennial herbs are probably the easy ones to start with. So rosemary, sage, thyme, any of the geraniums. I think woody sort of plants are probably the easiest to start off with children. And they're not, you basically take a finger's worth of plant material, strip off most of the leaves, leaving a couple at the top, and sticking it in some soil with a humid environment. So they're not hard to do. It's just maintaining it and looking after it. And I'm assuming the person there was meaning propagating plant material, but it could be propagation in other ways as well. That's okay. I'm not sure what that question was. Is there another question? I'll move on to the next one.
Sure. So Jane's asked, what is a worm tower?
A worm tower is just a tube with holes in it. Just imagine a big pipe where 1 centimetre holes have been drilled in. So you can make your own. You can purchase them at gardening supply shops. They cost about $30 and they just go in the soil. So they're a worm farm, but they're inbuilt into the soil. So the worms live in the ground, and I can send links out to the food waste recycling one that goes through what a worm tower is as well. So I'll send out some links when I send out the information to all the participants today. Yeah. Yep.
Alicia has asked, do you take student placements?
It's tricky at the moment, so no. So no student placements at the moment. We have had student placements. We tend to take university students rather than secondary students though. So we haven't had anyone younger than a university placement at this stage, but we probably could consider it. We haven't done it before though.
Melissa has asked, is there a cost to having an educator work with the school?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It's the cost of having a part-time teacher. So you're paying for a teacher on site 1 day a week, and they will look after and maintain and run 4 hours of educational classes to the school a week. So it's actually someone taking on that role and maintaining the garden for the school. So it is a paid role, but some of the other options of teacher PDs or mentoring schools are a cheaper option if you're interested. And then the Stephanie Alexander model is that the school has complete ownership of the program for themselves, and they engage and employ their own staff. So there's different ways that schools can take on a program. It just depends on how deeply you want to go and how much you want the students involved.
Christine has mentioned that lemon myrtle trees are the best. So I assume she's recommending them for schools.
Yeah, they are a bit tricky. They are a subtropical tree, and you just have to find the right spot for a lemon myrtle. They need slight shelter and shade and lots of water. Mine's not looking too good because of all the dogs mine's on my nature strip, and all the dogs have been coming by and urinating on mine. So mine's looking dreadful at the moment. So mine's not looking so good. So you do have to be careful where you plant your lemon myrtles, but the tea is fantastic. The smell is great too.
Excellent. Well, I think hopefully I have not missed any questions. My deepest apologies if I did miss someone, but I think we've gone through all the questions now, and I can see we're just a little bit over time. So I think it might be a nice place to finish up there, and just thank you all once again for joining us today. If you have any suggestions on how we can better support you during these times, then please let us know. I hope you had some fun. I know I did. And I hope to see you all at another environmental event soon. So any last words, Ellen?
Thank you, Karina. Good luck, everyone, with your food gardening journey. I love coming out to visit schools and seeing all the great work that's going on. So thank you. Thank you for today. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you. Bye.
See you all later. Bye.
Bye.